So this video is one that I've actually been meaning to do or considering doing pretty much since these children went missing. In the early days, my instincts told me this is what was going on, based on Malaya's interview, based on the way Daniel was talking in his interviews. But I didn't want to come out and say it back then because I didn't feel like I had anything really solid to go with. But over time, we've heard more and more about what life was like for the children in that house. And it has basically confirmed what I suspected from the beginning, and that is that they weren't welcome in that house, that they weren't well cared for, and that, at the very least, Janie and Daniel did not like them. In terms of the title for this video, it is a play on words, because in psychology terms, there is what is referred to as the Cinderella effect. And that basically refers to the fact that there is a much, much higher incidence of child abuse and mistreatment from a step-parent than a biological parent. In evolutionary terms, psychologists refer to it in terms of that step-parents are basically hardwired to try and ensure the success of their own genetics. So when it comes to stepchildren who have no biological connection to them, then that is a threat to their own genetics. Now, obviously, that's not something that is going to be verbalised by a step-parent at any point in time. But that is what is basically used as part of the explanation when you're talking about the psychology of the Cinderella effect. Another thing that psychologists talk about when it comes to this Cinderella effect is that it tends to become exacerbated when a new child comes on the scene that is biologically connected to the step-parent, as in this case, Meadow. Because Meadow is Malaya's daughter, Meadow is Daniel's daughter. From a psychological perspective, when you get a new child come along like that, that's when you see an uptick in bad treatment towards non-biological children from step-parents. I would imagine that the CPS file on these children would probably show that the issues in terms of their welfare, the concerns over their welfare, probably either began or escalated around the time that Meadow was born. Now, I do plan on doing a video down the track where I discuss the Cinderella effect in more depth. But in this video, obviously the focus here is on Lily and Jack, and also on one of Daniel's statements in his recent Turkey interview. If you've not caught my previous videos where I was discussing Daniel's latest interview, then in my very first video I mentioned how incredibly angry I was over that interview. Just makes a complete utter mockery of the case, and how basically I'm determined to strip down every part of that interview and show you all Daniel's lies, all his inconsistencies, and all the instances where his narrative has changed or just is completely different from one that's been given elsewhere. So in these videos, as opposed to my usual strategy of just basically doing a straight out discussion and analysis of what Daniel is saying, I have also pulled in various resources to illustrate what's going on here. And that is the same in this video. So with that said, let's jump in.
Yeah. And so what's the layout of the house look like? So
Well, the layout of the house is we have the bedroom at the very end.
Okay.
And then we have Lily and Jack's room and my other kid's bedroom and the bathroom and the kitchen and the living room.
Okay.
So
how many bedrooms is that?
3 bedroom.
3 bedrooms. And
Yep.
and I know some people have asked, like, Lily and Jack, they shared a bedroom. Was there a reason why one wasn't in one room and one wasn't in the other?
Well, my other kids were in the other bedroom. It really didn't matter if like, but I know my daughter Rain and Arlo, they like to be in the same bedroom and they like to play together, right?
Yeah.
So, and it was a lot different from my other two kids, not having like any other kids involved like with me and being a family before this, right? So it was kind of new to them. It was kind of new to Lily and Jack as well, especially with the new baby coming in too. So
Yeah.
it was a little bit different for everybody.
Now, I need to start by pointing out that when Malaya and Daniel first got together, they were living at Patty's place, meaning that, well, I don't know where Daniel was living beforehand, but when he was spending time with his own children, it's not like that room in the trailer was their room all along, because there would have been that period of time when him and Malaya weren't living in the trailer, and the kids, if they were visiting with him, would have been staying somewhere else, I guess. So this turkey guy asks Daniel why Lily and Jack were sharing a room as opposed to having their own rooms. And Daniel really, really stuttered a lot around this. There was definitely a serious lack of fluency when he's trying to explain the reason why Lily and Jack didn't have their own room. And of course, he used his favourite persuasive word throughout, the right. So he says that Rain and Arrow like to play together, right? Meaning, come on, you need to understand that. Of course they want to be in the same room. So you can tell from the get-go that what he's saying is just basically he's coming up with that on the spot, and that's not the real reason why Lily and Jack were sharing a room. He is stuttering around it. He throws in right a few times, which is his persuasive device. It's like Janie with her believe me. With Daniel, he goes right, which is basically you have to believe me because it is truthful. He struggles to spit out an entire sentence in one go, so you get a lot of repetition. So my other kids were in the other bedroom. It 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 really didn't matter if like you get the like and stuff. So really lack of fluency, inability to actually spit out what he's trying to say, because it's all a load of BS. So Jack and Lily live there, or were living there full time. They were there 7 days a week, all year round. His children were there every other weekend, meaning 2 nights every couple of weeks, 4 nights a month, maybe on a longer month, additional nights. But if we look at it over a year, then 52 nights out of the entire year they were there. So you have this statement here from Malaya where she told the RCMP that basically Lily and Jack shared a room, but they divided it in two because they would be up at all hours of the night when it was open concept. Well, that problem could have been easily solved by giving them each their own room. And conveniently, Daniel has a son and a daughter, both of which are roughly 2 years older than Lily and Jack were. So why not have the arrangement where Rain would sleep in Lily's room for those 2 nights that she's there, and then Arrow would sleep in Jack's room for those 2 nights? I mean, at the end of the day, those 2 children had their own rooms, their own space in their own house, where for 12 nights out of 14, that's where they slept. So it wasn't going to be such a drama for them to have to share a room with a different child. I believe, based on what Janie has said, that Rain has recently turned 9. So I would imagine that when they're at home with their mother, that they don't share a bedroom. So him saying, oh, they like to share a room, that's just BS. So what's really going on here with what Daniel is saying? So he pulls out that his focus here is his children, not Lily and Jack. He throws them in at the end. But he basically talks about his children, how they like to be in the same room, they like to play together, and it was a lot different for them. So he's referring to the adjustment that they had to make when basically him and Malaya got together and Malaya's kids came into the picture. So he's talking about being a family before this, and then he throws in right. So it was kind of new to them. And then at the end he throws in it was kind of new to Jack and Lily as well, or Lily and Jack as well, especially with the new baby coming in too. So essentially what he's trying to throw out here is that he didn't want to make it too much of a change for his children. He didn't want to basically make them feel that they weren't still more important than Lily and Jack. The emphasis on that they were a family before Lily and Jack came along. Essentially there's a bit of leakage there. He's basically saying that he doesn't consider Jack and Lily as family. He considers them as basically intruding on his family. He was happy with it, with having these 2 children that were his biological children. And Lily and Jack came along and they're not really family. By keeping a separate room for his own children, he was maintaining the segregation there. I'm not going to make my children share a room with these kids. I'm going to allow them to have their own space. And I am willing to bet that that room had nice toys that Lily and Jack weren't allowed to play with. Essentially, he's telling us here he didn't want to make his children have to adapt to having these other children in their lives. As far as he was concerned, they could still share a room together. They could still play together. He didn't really give a rat's if they played with Lily and Jack. You have a blended family and you have this seemingly perfect opportunity to allow the children to act as siblings, allow the children to adapt to being in each other's lives by having them share a room, by encouraging them to play together. But instead, he would rather see his own children just stick together. He wasn't concerned about them forming a relationship with Lily and Jack. For him, the priority was his children. Hence, his children got to have their own room, and for 12 days out of 14, that room sat there empty, while Lily and Jack, who couldn't really share a room without it being separated, got squished into one room. No matter how he tries to dress it up, the truth is here that Daniel was prioritising his own children. He was setting his own children up above Malaya's children. They were more important than Malaya's children, so even though that room was empty for 12 days in a fortnight, Malaya's children had to share a room with a divider in that room so that his children could have their own room and didn't have to interact with Lily and Jack if they didn't really want to.
And so, yeah, your other children, they weren't there that night, correct?
No, they weren't. They were there the weekend prior.
So relative to where Jack and Lily's bedroom is to where you guys sleep, how close is that? Is that
Yeah,
like
it's actually
must
the next
share
bedroom.
wall?
It's actually the next bedroom over.
And you guys mentioned that you guys could hear them throughout the morning. Is that correct?
Yes, I actually did hear. I know when it says in the documents that we heard them in the next room over, like in their bedroom. I didn't hear them in their bedroom.
So, what Daniel is doing throughout this interview is basically every time he tries to change his narrative a little bit to make it a little bit more convincing, he comes out with, well, I know it says this in the documents. So, essentially, what he's doing here is trying to throw shade on the RCMP, trying to say that they actually got the information wrong. Now, let's be realistic. Without hearing the actual interviews that were done with Malaya and Daniel, then we can't say that they were 100% correct in what was put in those documents. If you followed the Madeline Soto case, you will know that in terms of reports by law enforcement relating to interviews that were done by Stearns or by Jen Soto, that there were times when they basically put the wrong information. When you listen to the interview and you go, that's actually not what was said. So, yes, when someone in law enforcement is writing a report about an interview that they've done with someone, they can make mistakes in that report. However, these things that are written in the documents are backed up with interviews from Daniel Martel. These are things that he came out and said to the media early on. But he doesn't want to admit that he's changing his story, so instead he's blaming it on the documents, hoping that people will forget that there's this whole treasure trove of interviews where he's basically said what we see in the documents. Now, I said this in some of the previous videos. It seems that he, like Belinda, has been warned about making statements about Malaya. Because what he does throughout this interview is he gives people enough for them to make their own conclusions when it comes to Malaya and when it comes to the RCMP. Because, of course, he wants us to believe that he's best buds with the RCMP. So he can't then turn around and criticise them and say that they're getting it all wrong and they don't know what they're doing. So instead he just carefully throws shade at them in a way that we're supposed to take what he's saying and translate it to the RCMP stuffed up, which is not the truth. The truth is here that he has changed his story, but he's not going to say that. Instead, he's blaming it on the documents. Well, the documents say this, but this is the truth. As in, see, the RCMP don't even know what they're talking about. Don't look at me. I haven't changed my story. It's the RCMP who got it wrong. In this instance, however, we know that this is actually directed at Malaya because her statement to the RCMP was that she heard them in their bedroom that morning. So in this instance, this statement is basically just more of his attempt to completely discredit Malaya, more of his attempt to try and convince his audience that he's totally innocent and that actually this is all something that was orchestrated by Malaya.
I heard when Lily would pop in, I heard Jack in the kitchen.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
And
I heard him rustling around in the kitchen, right? And but then when me and Malaya made our way out to the kitchen, there was nothing moved. The chairs were still perfectly in place. There was no chairs pulled up against the counter for them to, they usually would jump up and take food if they wanted, because kids always do that, right? They would go into the fridge. They would go into the other pantry and grab food if they wanted. Like, they had unlimited food if they wanted to grab it. And, they would go into the fridge, take yogurt cups and eat them, or cereal or whatever. So, but nothing was moved, Daniel. Nothing was moved.
I spoke with him in a recorded interview for nearly an hour, and he says he and the children's mother, Malaya Brooks Murray, were in bed with their other child, a baby, and they were sort of dozing in and out of sleep. And Lily and Jack were playing in the kitchen, but Lily came into the bedroom multiple times and woke him up.
Lily came in multiple times, so I seen her that morning, and Jack was out playing in the kitchen, I'm guessing. And
Okay, so let's start with Daniel's narrative. So he starts by saying that Lily would pop in, and he says that he heard Jack in the kitchen. And when the turkey guy goes all interesting, Daniel took that as basically a cue to provide more information. He's basically read the cue from this turkey guy and gone, I need to be more convincing. So he adds additional details. We have Jack rustling around in the kitchen, and he follows through with a right, which, like I said, is the same as Janie's believe me. So he's saying, you've got to believe me now. But let's have a look at what he has said on previous occasions. So we have one previous interview when he has Lily and Jack playing in the kitchen. That's the only time we hear him referring to Lily playing in the kitchen. And in that one, Lily came into the room. Now you'll notice in this particular instance with the turkey guy, he referred to Lily as popping in. Lily popped in. I don't think it's a coincidence that in this instance he used the term popped in, because it's his brain going, well, I don't know what the F this story is meant to be anymore, because on one hand you're claiming she stuck her head in, on the other hand you're claiming that she came in. So his brain is going for the in-betweener. She popped in. You could interpret it either way. So I think basically his brain has... It's that thing that I've said before, that the brain is hardwired to not lie. So when you try to lie, when you try to tell big tales and stuff, it gives you away with things like the inability to just give a full sentence. So these ones where Daniel keeps stuttering around and stops partway through the sentence. Classic example of the brain going, hang on, that's not a true story. Hang on, wait. So you get the lack of fluency in what they are saying. Quite often you might get an absence of personal pronouns. So they'll talk about things happening and they won't include them in it. You also get fading facts, but I haven't seen that so much from Daniel. That's basically where your sentence trails off. Daniel, on the other hand, instead of his sentences trailing off, he likes to use right on the end of his sentences to try and convince people that that lie is actually the truth. The other thing, of course, that he does is that thing with his tongue. So the second interview that we hear, again, Daniel says that Lily came in multiple times, and he says, Jack was playing in the kitchen, I'm guessing. Now, while that interview was done fairly early on in the case, I couldn't tell you exactly when it was done, but it is interesting that he's backtracking here a little bit and going, I'm guessing. Now, his interview with the RCMP when he introduced the concept of Jack playing in the kitchen was the 6th of May, so 4 days in. So prior to that, he hadn't introduced the idea of Jack playing in the kitchen. And then we have the interview where he's talking with, I think it was from, she sounds like the CBC lady, I think, when he says Jack and Lily were playing in the kitchen. Like I said, the only time we hear that. But him saying Jack was playing in the kitchen, I'm guessing, is so telling. He might as well have just put a big liar sign on his head and just admitted that the entire story was a load of BS. Why do I say that? Well, Daniel's gone through a few phases in terms of what he's been putting out to the public over the last 5 months. So we know that he's been very closely following YouTubers. He's been very closely following Facebook. And as people question things because they don't make sense or because they're a contradiction, he adapts his narrative. Now, this interview that he's just done with the turkey guy is several months after he spoke to the RCMP, several months after his interviews with, I think it was Globe and Mail and CBC. So in this version with this turkey guy, Jack was rustling around in the kitchen. And yet in another interview we have him guessing that Jack was playing in the kitchen. We have another interview where Jack and Lily were both playing in the kitchen, but he doesn't give any justification of how he knows that. So I'm going to come back to the I'm guessing in a moment, because I'm going to go through Malaya's statements to RCMP and Daniel's statement to RCMP. So we have two statements here that Malaya gave. The first one is she heard them playing in the other room and was going in and out of sleep. Lily came in the room, and there must be a time, a couple of times. Daniel was sleeping the whole time and didn't really wake up. So that's the first version Malaya gave. Then we have a second version. Malaya heard the kids playing in their bedroom around this time. They woke Meadow up, so she took her into bed and turned the TV on for her, then faded in and out of sleep. The kids were giggling, laughing and talking to each other. The kids were in the room right next to theirs, so they were loud. Now we have Daniel's version. When Lily was sticking her head in their room, sticking her head in this instance, not coming in, he could hear Jack in the kitchen in the background. He did not see him, but he was usually loud and clumsy, so it was easy to hear him. So you can basically see what's happened here. So like I said, Daniel introduced this idea of Jack being in the kitchen on the 6th of May. Malaya had already done these interviews. So when they were interviewing Daniel, when he said Jack was in the kitchen, they would have questioned, how do you know he was in the kitchen? They may or may not have challenged him on that in terms of Malaya saying that the children were in the bedroom. But at the very least, they would have challenged him with, how do you know he was in the kitchen? So this is where he would have said, where he said he was usually loud and clumsy, so it was easy to hear him. Note here, he's referring to Jack as being usually loud and clumsy. So that again tells us that this is just a complete utter fabrication, because he is talking in general terms. He's not saying, yeah, I could tell he was in the kitchen because he was banging around and just being his usual loud, clumsy self. No, he gives this general thing, he's usually loud and clumsy, so it's easy to hear him.
What happened was we woke up, I heard them playing in the next room beside us, and I was drifting in and out of sleep.
So in the one interview that Malaya did, she has this same story. But in this interview she says, we woke up and they were playing in the room. We could hear them playing in the room next to us. So at the point when he did this other interview, when he said Jack was playing in the kitchen, I'm guessing, he had been challenged by RCMP about his statement, and he was also aware of Malaya's statement, which of course contradicts his because she's saying they were playing in the bedroom. So the retelling where he said Jack was playing in the kitchen, I'm guessing, is classic Daniel adapting. He's reacting to what he's heard people saying online, on YouTube and on Facebook, basically. So rather than doubling down and going, well, this is what I heard. He's going with the, I'm guessing, meaning, well, I'm not sure, I'm just going to make a guess. Whereas you have these other statements where, you know, Jack is so loud and clumsy that of course he knew he was in the kitchen. Which of course is a complete contradiction to saying he was rustling around in the kitchen. Rustling around implies not making a great deal of noise, not someone who is loud and clumsy. Now bear in mind that Daniel has given this recount a number of times now. When someone is recounting something truthful, something that actually happened, then for starters, you're not going to expect it to be verbatim. When it's verbatim, you tend to think it's a made-up narrative. But what you may see is that they clarify things a little bit more. So let's say that Daniel has said, oh, he was in the kitchen, and you can tell he's in the kitchen because he clatters around and makes a lot of noise and he's clumsy. He may have remembered that actually, and I remember hearing a chair scraping across the floor. Maybe something that he remembers afterwards, after that first retelling. He's not changing the narrative by doing that. He's adding to what he's already explained. But that's not what he's doing here. We have, on one hand, Lily is coming into the bedroom, while on another hand, she's just popping her head in, or sticking her head in. Then in this particular retelling, she pops in, which is basically his brain going, well, what the F? I don't know what story I'm meant to be giving here. Then in terms of Jack, he's given no details initially in terms of what Jack was doing. Then he introduces Jack being quite noisy and clumsy. But he doesn't actually say it was that particular instance. He just uses that as an explanation that, well, you know where Jack is because he's noisy and clumsy. And honestly, that's the first we've heard of that. And based on everything else I've heard about Jack, I actually don't think that is the case. And then his story changes to Jack rustling around in the kitchen, which is essentially the opposite of being loud and clumsy. And then, of course, we get the I'm guessing. So straight out, that tells us this whole story is a complete load of BS. When you've got that many contradictions, it's BS. Now, as I mentioned in the last couple of videos, in this interview, he is now going out of his way to throw Malaya under the bus. He seems to have decided to go with Dingbat's story, even though that's actually been proven to be a whole load of BS. But somehow Daniel seems to think that if he can at least insinuate that that is what happened, and then the people who still believe that story are going to basically think that since he's giving it credibility, it must be true. So he takes a new direction with his narrative. Now, what I said before, yes, people will offer clarifying information over time as they retell things. They will clarify things a little bit more because they will have gone through it in their heads. But when you suddenly introduce completely new details, then that's a red flag. That basically says, yep, you're making it up. So this is when he comes out with this whole idea of him and Malaya going out into the kitchen and everything being perfectly in place. Which, I mean, the guy's an imbecile. Honestly, it's a really, really poor attempt to push that whole a relative took the children away narrative. And this is why. So first of all, obviously there is the fact that he can't string one sentence together without pauses, without going backwards, without filler words like But he's saying here, when me and Malaya made our way out to the kitchen, there was nothing moved. The chairs were still perfectly in place. There was no chairs pulled up against the counter for them to, and then he changes tack a bit more. They would usually jump up and take food, and then I'll come back to the rest of the description there. So he's creating this picture of going into the kitchen and it being perfectly spotless with no sign whatsoever that the children had been in there at all that morning.
Recyclables were everywhere, piled up bags everywhere. The counters were so full you couldn't pick out any one thing because it was really piled up with a lot of stuff.
So the house is like a tip. And Daniel claims that he can tell that nothing was out of place, essentially. The chairs were still perfectly in place. Whereas when we hear what Belinda's saying, sounds like the chairs were probably never perfectly in place. We have this account from Malaya that the night before she was so tired that she put the kids to bed in their same clothes, which to me would suggest that the kitchen was not tidied up after they had dinner. Even if they took their poutine or whatever it was home with them and ate it at home, either way, the kitchen's still going to be a mess from the night before. So there's no way, first of all, that Daniel would be able to tell if anyone had been doing anything in the kitchen that morning. But by saying that everything was, still perfectly in place, then he's implying one of two things. Either a ghost Jack was in the kitchen rustling around, hence the reason everything was still in place because, ghosts don't move things. Or the other thing he's implying here is that somebody came into the house after Jack and Lily had been noisily doing stuff in the kitchen and Lily sticking her head in, and we're hearing from Malaya that they're not quiet when they get up. And yet Daniel is implying here that someone quietly came into the house without making any noise, without talking to the children, and quietly tidied up the kitchen, put everything back where it belonged, even though they wouldn't know where everything necessarily belonged. And then they got the children out of the house and vanished them. That's what he's trying to make people believe. Aside from the utter absurdity of it, like someone's going to take the children, but first they're going to tidy up and take the risk of someone waking up and catching them there. Sure. But you have Janie's account that she heard the children playing out in the garden. They were being really, really loud. So Daniel's now basically blown Janie's account out of the water, which would mean that one or both of them are lying, which again goes to guilt, basically. If, as they claim, they had nothing to do with the disappearance of Jack and Lily, then there's no reason whatsoever for them to be lying. There's no reason whatsoever for them to be changing their stories. So Daniel's just made himself look like a complete utter twat. Now here's where we get back down into the nitty-gritty. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who, when I heard him talking about how the kids do things in the kitchen, that their stomach just sunk. Because what I heard broke my heart. When you realise the truth of what Daniel is saying here, he has basically admitted a form of abuse with these children. So the first really, really glaring thing here is him saying that essentially if they wanted something to eat, they had to pull chairs over and climb up to access food. Meaning that this wasn't a child-friendly house. There was not food put in a location that was easily accessible for the children. If they wanted something, they had to climb up and get it. They had to drag a chair over, climb up and get it. Now, he seems to have not realised when he was saying that he's admitting here that essentially these children were being denied one of their basic needs. Sure, he then goes on to talk about the fridge and the other pantry, but this is after establishing essentially that they need to, that if they want stuff, they're going to have to climb up on chairs. And I can't help thinking that the fridge and the other pantry bit was added in, probably from realising what he was saying. Now, something that is really, really obvious is the excessive detail that he's going into here. It's not just a case of, yeah, because, you know, if we're a bit late getting up, then they might grab their own breakfast and they make a bit of a mess because they're little kids. No, he goes over the top, which to me straight away says this is complete utter BS. And there's one statement in particular that hammers it home. These kids were not allowed to help themselves to food in that kitchen. Now, I'm guessing that had Daniel gone as far as some step-parents do and locked the cupboards, that Belinda probably would have noticed it when she was there. But trust me, it does happen. It's something that I have come across before, where step-parents lock cupboards, lock fridges, and the children have to basically get permission to get food. Now, before I go more into the language of what he was saying here in terms of them getting food, I just want to point out his correction. He's talking about them taking food, and he said, because kids always did, and then pauses and redirects himself, always do that, right? So he basically put them past tense again, something him and Janie have done so often. He claims that these children are still alive. He claims that he knows that they're safe and that they've been abducted by someone from Malaya's family. Or at least some of that he just insinuates. He wants his audience to get there themselves, because he knows he's going to be in deep if he tries to make direct accusations against Malaya. But right there, the fact that, first of all, he uses past tense, and secondly, that he has that moment where he becomes aware of it and has to correct it, shows you that, first of all, he realises that he has slipped up and you've had the leakage, and that he's used past tense. But also, of course, it shows that he knows the children aren't alive. Now, if it was just an innocent slip-up and he felt confident that the children were alive, then it wouldn't be something that he would actually even notice. He is hyper-aware of the fact that he's got to be careful not to use past tense, because he knows that's a giveaway, because he watches YouTube. So he's learning the things that he shouldn't do. But with or without past tense, here he's going, well, you know, they do these things because that's what kids do, right? Basically saying, you've got to believe me because it's normal. It's normal behaviour for kids. So, of course, these kids are going to do that because that's what every kid does. Again, trying to be overly persuasive. If this was just normal behaviour for Jack and Lily, he wouldn't feel the need to persuade people that, well, this is normal, this is what kids do. He would just state it as, You know, well, normally they do go in and they grab themselves a bit of breakfast if we're having a bit of a lie-in. So firstly, we get a tour of the kitchen from him. So he talks about they would normally jump up and take food if they wanted. Then he does, you know, because kids do that, right? And then they would go to the fridge. They would go into the other pantry and grab food if they wanted. Over-explaining to the max. First of all, we don't care where they get the food from. We don't need you to explain to us where they get the food from. Like I said, I would just expect to hear, yeah, they'll go in and they'll make themselves breakfast if we're still in bed. But no, he has to go through each one of the locations where they are likely to get food. But note the actual words he uses here. When he talks about them jumping up to get food from the cupboards, he says they take food. A bit of leakage there. He's basically showing us that on the occasions when the kids do manage to get into the cupboards when they're not allowed to, that essentially they aren't allowed. They're taking it. Taking as in essentially stealing. When you take something, there is that sense of it wasn't yours. It wasn't on offer, but you took it anyway. So it's a harsher description of basically going in and grabbing what you need. He does use grab a few times, and that can go either way. I would quite often say, you know, go and grab yourself something to eat from the cupboard. I don't see anything in terms of that as a red flag. But what you will note is that when he's saying take here, he's being very specific. They climb up, they get into these cupboards that they're not supposed to get into, and they take things. And then he talks about getting into the fridge and into the pantry and grabbing food. So it's less specific. Being less specific, it's more of a hypothetical, meaning that he's not talking about a real situation. So in his mind, because it's hypothetical, they're not really taking the food because it's only hypothetical and this is not what they would do. I'm not sure if I've explained that very well. Hopefully you get what I'm saying. But the huge red flag here for me is that after each one, he finishes with if they wanted or if they want it. Meaning, basically, yeah, you know, they can get food if they want it. It is over-explaining, but not only that, it goes a step beyond that. And it is this sense of, yeah, their needs are being met. It's like he is pushing hard to convince people they can get food if they want it. It's not something that I would expect to hear here if it was just normal for them to just go in and grab food from the kitchen if they were hungry. I have to say though, the way that he is going over the top and describing them getting food from the cupboards, from the fridge, from the pantry, the way he's describing it gives me a sense of someone talking about, oh, we got a mouse in the house and it got into the cupboards, it got into the pantry. Like he's talking about some kind of rodent getting into things that it's not meant to get into. And here's the part where my stomach just sank the moment I heard him say it. He said, they had unlimited food. If they wanted to grab it. Nobody says that. That is major over-explanation. He's pushing something that should be a given. He's offering up an explanation that wasn't asked for. Yeah, of course they've got enough to eat. They had unlimited food. if they wanted. It's particularly concerning that he uses the word unlimited. You don't say that in terms of kids. Nobody is going to say they had unlimited food. The moment I hear him throw in unlimited, that's a huge red flag for me. My takeaway from this is these children were restricted. They were not allowed to go and help themselves to food in that kitchen. They had very limited rights when it came to food. And then he goes into some more specifics. He says, they go into the fridge and take yogurt cups and eat them, or cereal, or whatever. So again, he's gone into specifics. This time he's talking about yogurt cups, and he's gone back to using take, meaning they didn't ask permission, they just took. They were not allowed to. If they go into the fridge and help themselves to yogurt cups, that's breaking the rules. And then he throws in, or cereal or whatever, which basically suggests that there really wasn't a lot of stuff in there that was available to those children. Because he's not really going into specifics here at all now. The yogurt cups, clearly, they were a treat that they weren't meant to take. They were meant to get permission for. And I'm willing to bet, given that all he can come up with is cereal or whatever, is that there were really not a lot of child-friendly snacks in that cupboard. There was probably very little in that cupboard that those children could actually access in the pantry, in the cupboards, in the fridge. And then we get, once again, the attempt to be overly persuasive. Nothing was moved, Daniel. Nothing was moved. You get the repetition to try and hammer in the fact, to try and make sure that they believe you. But like I said too, his manipulation throughout this interview is that he repeatedly uses this turkey guy's name, trying to create that sense of closeness, the sense of camaraderie, but perhaps most importantly, the sense of his being trustworthy, because he's made this personal connection, so of course he's telling the truth. Now, one of the things that Daniel does, one of his baseline things, which tells you that he's being less than truthful, less than genuine, or just plain BSing, is you get the tongue sticking out. Well, we got a variation on that this time. So he says, I heard Jack in the kitchen. And then this time his mouth doesn't actually open, but you can see him working the inside of his lips with his tongue. It's the same thing. I suspect that maybe he was aware of the fact that he'd been doing it so many times. So straight up, he's giving himself away. That story about hearing Jack in the kitchen is just a complete fabrication. And then when he's talking about the chairs still being perfectly in place, which we know is highly unlikely given what Belinda has told us about the house, but he's actually doing a bit of self-grooming. He's smoothing his beard as he's saying that. Again, not a good sign for him. It is again showing us that this is all BS. The other thing we see him do quite a lot in this interview is that he kind of rubs under his arm. So he'll put one hand across and the hand sort of rubs his side under his arm, which he tends to do when he's feeling the pressure a little bit anxious, or perhaps just trying to work on creating his narrative. And this time he did it again as we're getting the So he's trying to figure out where to go with his narrative. And while he's doing that, he's doing the rubbing with the arm. And that's when he comes out with there were no chairs up against the counter, and he's shaking his head at the same time. The other thing we see from him here is when he says they always did, before he corrects himself, he closes his eyes. And throughout this whole thing, there is excessive blinking. All his body language is telling us here is that everything he's saying is just a complete fabrication. His body language and these little leaks and things is telling us that this is all complete utter BS. So I'm going to move on from this particular interview and continue to explain why these children were outsiders in this house, why they didn't belong, why they weren't wanted there, or at least how we can see that that was the case. The things we've heard from Daniel here basically are confirming everything else that we've heard, largely from Janie, but also from Daniel.
I haven't even got to see my own kids. Not even Meadow yet.
That one really requires no explanation whatsoever. I haven't even gotten to see my own kids, not even Meadow. So, despite all his claims that, you know, he's the only one who's doing interviews for Lily and Jack and he's going to keep doing this until they're found and all this BS, he's made it quite clear here. He's completely let us know he does not see these children as family. To him, and we know to Janie, they're just intruders in his world. Now, while I don't condone what this tint guy did, he did get us information from Wade Paris. I mean, as long as people continue to pull stunts like that, then YouTubers are going to continue to have a bad rap. YouTubers are going to continue to be viewed and portrayed in a negative light by mainstream media. We're not going to be taken seriously when people pull stunts like what Tint did, basically secretly recording Wade and putting it on the internet. And there is a little part of me that feels tainted by using this audio. But at the same time, I realise that the information is out there now. The information is public knowledge. And we've seen in some of the articles from mainstream media that they have made use of this Tint recording also. So even though I disagree with how this information was got, I think it, in terms of working towards getting justice for Lily and Jack, it is still quite valuable. So as you know, Wade gave us quite a lot of information in terms of the relationship with Daniel and in terms of living arrangements and stuff like that. Now, in the full version that I've put on my channel, some of the subtitles aren't right. So I've gone back over these particular bits of audio and fixed the subtitles. So even though some of it is hard to pick up, you'll be able to pick up what's being said based on the subtitles. And of course, I'll talk you through it as we get through each clip. First of all, I probably should explain. She got a lovely, lovely new bed today. I had ordered one from Pet Barn and it arrived. It's a nice big squishy nest that's the right size for her. What does she do? She still has to sleep in Mouse's bed, which is far too small for her and makes her snoring worse, presumably because her head is hanging over the side of the bed. Admittedly, this was her puppy bed when she was much smaller, but she just doesn't seem to have realised that she's not that size anymore.
You don't wake the kids. He beats the kids, he beats their daughter.
Now, I just want to remind you here, Wade didn't know he was being recorded. And also, he really doesn't have a dog in this fight. Malaya is only his stepdaughter. When you listen to the interview, he's not trying to talk her up in any way. You can tell he disapproves of many of her life choices. So for him to turn around and say that Daniel was beating the kids and beating Malaya, then I believe that. Because, like I said, it really sounds like there is no love lost between him and Malaya. So he's got no reason to make that up. And of course, we also know that him and Cindy were the only ones that were really regularly seeing these children and Malaya. They were the only ones who were allowed access, essentially. And while I will cover it in another video, there's been many things that Daniel has said which to me definitely suggest that there is a no contact order currently out between him and Malaya. And of course, we've heard accounts from multiple sources about these children getting black eyes. And of course, Daniel with his excuses, which are so typical of what you hear from someone who is abusing.
Look at the house. Yeah. We get the locks on the door.
I have to say, Tint was a little bit out of his element here. So he wasn't asking clarifying questions. I think he was a little bit excited at being able to achieve his goal of recording Wade, and I think he was a little bit excited that Wade was willing to talk. He was probably getting more than he expected. So he wasn't asking for clarification with things like this. But this comment of there were locks on doors suggests to me that at the very least, these children may have been at some point in time locked in their bedroom. But I would have liked clarification from him, because while I did say, well, I would imagine that we would have probably heard from Belinda if the cupboards had locks on them, at the same time there was probably so much to take in that either she may not have noticed, or maybe it just isn't something that's come up in conversation when she's been on that channel that she goes on. It may be that she has actually noticed locks on cupboard doors, but that it hasn't been prompted yet in terms of someone asking her if that was the situation. But children should not be living in a house where there are locks on doors, where there are limitations on their movements.
He got 2 from a previous marriage, and those 2 that are missing are hers. Then they got the little girl together, and he didn't like her kids at all. But she said they beat them.
Okay, so clearly that's hearsay, meaning that he's reporting that this is what she has told him and Cindy. But like I said, there is so much to back that up. The fact that there was a full-on CPS investigation going on. The multiple black eyes, just for starters. And, I mean, let's admit it. Throughout the last 5 months, Daniel's push has always been about clearing his name. He talked the talk a little bit at the beginning with the interviews, but he quickly forgot that Lily and Jack even existed for the most part. And it became all about, I want to do a polygraph test because I want to prove this to all these people on social media. I want them to send the dogs in because I want to prove this to everyone on social media. He's forgotten the whole purpose of all this. He's forgotten that the rest of us are here because we want Lily and Jack found, and we want justice for Lily and Jack. For Daniel, the priority is Daniel. trying to convince people that he's innocent, he had nothing to do with it. But the thing is, he opens his mouth and he just puts the other foot in.
Now the host like that, I'm checking to see if there's food in the fridge. I'm checking see if there's locks on it.
Honestly, if you are going to be interviewing someone, then you need to take the time to truly listen. Not just be like, well, I just want to make sure I get as much audio of them as possible and then talk over the top of them or not give them a chance to clarify what they're saying. There's so many things here that could have been clarified, but like I said, this tint guy wasn't truly listening. So he was just basically, I think he was trying a little bit too hard to act like he was a buddy. So basically doing the sound, making sounds like he was agreeing with him, and then, going, oh, and what about this? Without truly listening and without asking for clarification. A follow-up there would have been, well, was there food in the fridge? Were there locks on the cupboards? But instead, this tint guy just basically butts in and that part of the conversation is gone.
Daniel's daughter, she's like 8 or 9. Her name is Rain. She said, Malaya locked them in the room.
Again, why was it possible to lock them in the room in the first place? Why are there locks on the doors? But the clarification I would like is, did she lock Daniel's kids in a room? Or were they saying that Malaya locked her children in a room? And was it maybe something to do with Daniel? I mean, what is the full story here? Was Daniel in a rage and she locked them in a room for their protection? There's only half the story here and no attempt to clarify. One of the things that's mentioned in the documents in terms of Malaya's statements is that Daniel was an involved parent. So when I hear this comment of she locked them in a room, is this something that was expected of her? Because we know that in these sort of relationships, these controlling relationships, that basically she had to toe the line. If she didn't do it the way that Daniel expected it to be done in terms of behaviour management, then he's going to gaslight her into making sure that she does it next time. He, from what we can tell, just hammered down. From everything you hear Janie say, from everything you hear Daniel say, it seems pretty clear that they spent the 2 years that she was living on that property making sure that she knew she was the worst parent on the planet. Making sure that she understood that she didn't know how to parent these children and that it needed to be done Daniel's way. I'm not giving her a free pass. I have no doubt that Malaya knows what happened to these children. But I also realise, from everything we've heard, that this was a majorly coercive relationship and that basically all Malaya's power was stripped away from her to the point where, she had to message him about McDonald's toys for her children because clearly she needed permission from him to get these $2 toys or however much they cost these days.
But sometimes I'll reach by, like Lily's head, like she'll rub my head, and I go to touch her, then she'll put her hands up. That means somebody slapped me.
Who, Maria?
Well, could be her, could be the other guy.
When a child has a reflex reaction like that, it is a huge red flag. Especially in terms of if you are putting your hands towards them and they are reacting in a way that says, don't come near me, don't touch me. Definitely a huge red flag. That to me definitely screams that he was hitting her. We've heard Belinda talk about Malaya having been a quiet, calm kind of parent. So either she's been on the same sort of rugs as Daniel and became aggressive, or we're definitely talking about Daniel here. Based on the way he's been speaking, I am very much convinced that he is the person who was responsible for what was happening to these children in that home.
And his other son, I think he gets him to beat Jack. His name's Arlo, and I think he's sick. He's thick and he's violent. I know that. So he probably gets him to beat Jack.
Now, on one hand, I doubt that Daniel would outwardly be saying, "Hey, Arrow, beat up Jack." But I think what Wade is getting at here is that whole creating that imbalance of power, giving Arrow the sense that it's okay for him to beat up this little kid who's 2 years younger than him and probably half his size. Clearly, we were seeing a lot of favouritism for those grandchildren from Janie. We were seeing a lot of favouritism from Daniel. They had their own room, even though they were only 2 days there out of 14. While Jack and Lily, for the sake of those 2 days, had to share a room. Daniel says about them preferring to play with each other. And we hear basically that, these toys actually belong to my grandchildren, but Lily plays with them when they're not here. Meaning that essentially, these kids, Daniel's kids, were given the special treatment. And if a child is prone to bullying and they see themselves as being treated as the kingpin, then they are going to bully the children who are seen as the lesser beings in their world. But we do have to accept here that that is speculation from Wade. He's not saying it is happening. He was speculating that it may have been happening. Now, of course, the person who gave us the clearest picture of where those children stood in terms of their value on that property was Janie. And I have a number of clips from her that I'm going to share with you.
Build a tall snowbank for them to go sledding in, all the grandchildren. And I would try to go coasting with them, but I have some medical problems.
So Janie gives this narrative of being involved in terms of doing things with Lily and Jack, watching Lily and Jack, going for walks with Lily and Jack. But when you actually listen to everything she's saying here, it becomes quite evident that in actual fact, what the situation is that she was doing these things with her grandchildren and Lily and Jack just happened to be around. So that part there, the building a snowbank for all the grandchildren, that comes on the tail end of the throwing snowballs at them and stuff. And then she makes it clear for all the grandchildren, meaning this is the effort I made when my grandchildren were here. You hear another clip where she's talking about basically, the only time that they went for walks in the woods was when my grandchildren were here. Whereas other times she has pushed this whole thing of, I've taken them for walks in the woods, but Jack wouldn't walk very far and I'd have to carry him. And she's left out that bit of information about it being basically when her grandchildren were there. So basically what she has done throughout her narrative is try and give the impression that she was involved with doing things with these children. But the reality is that she was only involving herself when her grandchildren were there. And Jack and Lily just happened to be there as well.
It really bothers me because I've been a grandmother for 9.5 years. In the last 2 months, I can't be a grandmother anymore. I'm not a grandmother. My oldest granddaughter's birthday was on the 25th of this month, and I couldn't even see her, all because of what happened. And I had nothing to do with it. But I am the one that is suffering. So is Jack and Lily. They don't know where they are. They don't know what's going on. Well, Meadow doesn't know what's going on, and my other 2 grandchildren don't know what's going on. I watched my oldest 2 grandchildren playing with those kids for the last 2 years.
Now, I've spoken at length about this particular thing that she's saying here before, so I'll keep it brief. First of all, her number one concern here is that she is suffering. And then clearly she realises that, oh, well, I better actually turn this back around and talk about Jack and Lily. And she comes up with this strange thing of they don't know what's going on. Meadows doesn't know what's going on. Just really, really odd. That is basically a really poor attempt at trying to show some sort of empathy for Lily and Jack, and it just falls flat. And then she goes on and she said, I watched my oldest 2 grandchildren play with those kids for the last 2 years. 2 things that stand out here. First of all, at the time that Lily and Jack went missing, her oldest 2 grandchildren were 6 and 8. Well, Lily and Jack were 4 and 6. Now, I don't know in terms of if Lily was older than Arrow or not, but she's pretty much the same age. But she's not considering them at all here. She's talking about her real grandchildren. And she refers to Lily and Jack as those kids. This is her classic line of those kids. There's no love lost here. They are always those kids. She's not showing any emotional connection. She is showing negativity towards them. And even when she's talking about how she's suffering and she didn't get to go to her granddaughter's birthday, she says, all because of what happened. So she even goes as far as she's essentially blaming Lily and Jack for her being unable to see her grandchildren. She's not concerned over the fact that they're missing. She's concerned over the impact that it is having on her life.
I can recover from this. It's going to take me a long time. But just think what the impact has on my grandchildren and Jack and Lily.
Again, the differentiation there. Her grandchildren and Jack and Lily. Because they're not her grandchildren. She's made it pretty clear here that she does not consider them as her grandchildren. They are intruders in her life. So this claim that Jack would call her granny and that they were like her grandchildren is complete, utter BS. She resented these children, and neither her nor Daniel actually liked them.
I begged Malaya to come out and tell her side of the story, and she's the only one that can answer the questions that we can't. I begged her to come out and talk for the sake of the grandchildren, for the sake of her children.
Again, priorities here. She wants Malaya to come out and talk, which this is just part of the whole act of, we believe Malaya was involved with these children being taken away. But she says, for the sake of the grandchildren, and then for the sake of her children. So again, she's made it clear that the priority here is that she wants things to be made right because it's impacting on her ability to see her grandchildren. And then she's like, for the sake of her children, as in Malaya's children, who aren't her grandchildren. As in Jack and Lily. she's made that very definite differentiation there. The grandchildren and Malaya's children. Two separate things. Which makes me think that it's possibly even more of a good thing that Meadow is in foster care, because it sounds like Janie is just becoming more and more resentful of Malaya. And given that Meadows was only 16 months when Janie last saw her, it is possible that she's just going to see Meadow as Malaya's daughter now and feel resentful towards her because of her resentment of Malaya.
It breaks my heart I can't see my grandchildren. It breaks my heart because I don't know where Lily and Jack is.
Again, the priorities are clear here. She's upset because she can't see her grandchildren. And then what she's trying to do here is basically perform for her audience. This is on the Facebook account thing. So she knows that these are people who are listening because they want to know what's happened with Lily and Jack. So she knows that she's got to do the act still, the concern for Lily and Jack. But at the same time, she is once again differentiating between her grandchildren and Lily and Jack. So she's made it clear, first of all, that the thing that is important to her is that she can't see her grandchildren. And then she throws in that, you know, it breaks her heart because she doesn't know where Lily and Jack are. Lily and Jack are an afterthought, and they're also clearly separate from her grandchildren.
And if she's supposed to be watching them all the time, that's a bunch of bullcrap. Because I would even watch my other two grandchildren when they were out in the yard, and I would always keep an eye on them when they were in the yard. And I was always yelling for them, "Where are you guys? Where are you guys?"
So she's given herself away again here as well. She's talking about when her grandchildren are in the yard, she keeps tabs on where they are. She's yelling for them, "Where are you guys?" You don't hear her saying that about Lily and Jack. All she says is that, "I watch them, and I ring Malaya and tell her when Jack's got his boots and his coat off." Meaning that that's really all she does. She makes note of the fact that they're in the yard, and then she lets Malaya know that Jack's got his boots and coats off. And she says coats. And you can bet that the reason she's doing that is basically gaslighting Malaya, showing Malaya that Malaya is a bad parent, because guess what? Your kids are outside, your son's taken his shoes and his coat off, and you didn't notice, so I'm going to let you know to make sure that you understand how much of a bad parent you are. That is the motivation there. She couldn't give two hoots if Jack had his coat and his shoes off, other than that it's giving her another way of gaslighting Malaya.
I had my granddaughter down digging worms for the chickens. And he would come down there and he would grab every worm that he could see. And when it would come time to go feed the chickens, he goes, "No, they were my friends. I'm keeping them."
So she's essentially telling us here that she was doing an activity with her granddaughter, and not only did Jack butt in, but he also messed things up. So she's saying, "I had my granddaughter down digging worms for the chickens." So the fact she's saying, "I had my granddaughter," is her establishing that this was something that she was doing with her granddaughter. This was a grandmother-granddaughter bonding exercise type thing. And then she goes on with, and he came down and would grab every worm that he would see. Note that, first of all, she's not referring to him by his name, as per usual. No surprise, really. So first of all, you've got that he would come down there. So it's not he would come and join us, meaning, you know, he was welcome to be included, but he would come down there. It's like he would barge in and interrupt. And then she talks about he would grab every worm that he could see. Now, earlier in this video, I said I was quite comfortable with Daniel referring to the children grabbing food from the kitchen, grabbing food from the pantry. It's fairly common word usage when we're talking about eating. It's showing the difference between just grabbing something to refuel as opposed to sitting down and taking your time and having a meal. So, no problems with that. But what Janie is basically implying here is more of a negative thing. He would grab every worm that he could see. That is that giving a sense of greed, grabbing something that's not yours, taking something that's not yours. In this context, it's taking on a different kind of meaning, a negative meaning. She's basically saying he was getting in the way. He was stopping them from getting worms for the chickens. Now, if this was such a regular thing, why not just buy a worm farm? Raise your own worms to feed your chickens. That whole story with the worms here, this is not intended as a how cute is this story. This is intended as a this kid was basically imposing. He was screwing with our routine. He was messing up my relationship with my granddaughter in terms of grandmother-granddaughter activities. He was in the way. And I hate to say it, but it makes it sound like even her chickens were more important than Jack as far as Janie was concerned.
She had a kitchen out in the yard. I had a play kitchen. I got a play kitchen for them. Well, for my oldest two grandchildren. And when they weren't here, that's what she did. She played with the kitchen.
This is another one of those statements where Janie actually proves to us that any interactions with Lily and Jack or anything connecting her with Lily and Jack was only because of her grandchildren. So she's talking about this little play kitchen. Now, she could just say they have a play kitchen and Lily loved playing in that, but she doesn't. She has to stop and point out the fact that actually it belonged to her grandchildren, her oldest two grandchildren. And the comment of her playing with it when they're not there. Again, not necessary information to give. So there's leakage here. She's making it clear that this kitchen that Lily played with actually belongs to her grandchildren, and that when they're not around, Lily would play with it. She's not meaning this in a positive way. She's making sure that people understand that, essentially, for starters, I'm guessing if her granddaughter was there and wanted to play with it, Lily would be told to go and do something else. But by specifically mentioning that she would play with it when her granddaughter wasn't around, she is implying right there that essentially Lily didn't have the right to be playing with it. It's that giving excess information, basically saying, yeah, this belongs to my grandchildren. She played with it when they weren't around. That's excess information. That is showing us that in her mind, Lily shouldn't have been touching her grandchildren's things when they weren't around. If it wasn't an issue for her, then she would just say, oh, Lily used to like baking things in the play kitchen out in the backyard. But no, she has to throw in the fact that it belongs to her grandchildren and that Lily was playing with it when they weren't around.
And then when my two oldest grandchildren would come down, every second weekend they would come. My oldest granddaughter would come in here and they'd say, Granny, we want some snacks to go up to the little cabin they built or the little fort they built. They built it themselves out of sticks and brush. And I'd say, there's the fridge. My other two grandchildren, they could have whatever they wanted. My fridge was like one of those doors when you go into a store. It would open and close all the time. My oldest granddaughter would come in here and she would take snacks for all of them and pack them in her backpack.
Note again the differentiation between the beginning of what she's saying and the end of what she's saying. So she makes it clear, first of all, that this relates to her other two grandchildren, as in this is not something that was available for Jack and Lily. And she says, my other two grandchildren, they could have whatever they wanted. And she hammers that in by basically comparing it to a store fridge. It's open and closed all the time, giving that impression that these kids can just go in and say, hey, can I get something out of the fridge? She probably was stocking it every second weekend before the children came to make sure there were things in there so they could help themselves to the fridge. And then she goes on to talk about her granddaughter would come in here and take snacks for all of them. So my takeaway from that, first of all, Jack and Lily weren't allowed in that RV, clearly, because only the granddaughter would go in. But it's no coincidence here that when she's talking about her granddaughter coming in and getting snacks for them to take up to the cubby house or whatever it is, that she specifically says she would come in here and take snacks for all of them. So now it's gone from these snacks being freely available to her grandchildren, but because her granddaughter is going to share them with Jack and Lily, now she is taking them. It's that suggestion that Janie doesn't actually approve of her granddaughter sharing snacks with Lily and Jack, because she buys them for her grandchildren, not for Lily and Jack. So we get the take thrown in. I feel sad for Lily and Jack, because basically what we're finding out here is that they were being given the message, essentially, that these other two children who were only there 2 days out of every 2 weeks were more welcome there than they were. They were basically being treated like outsiders, like intruders who weren't welcome.
The only time they go anywhere up in the woods is when my other 2 grandchildren are here. And they're always kept an eye on by me.
So the first time I heard her say this was a light bulb moment for me. She'd been telling all these people on Facebook that she watched Jack and Lily when they were outside. She'd been telling people on Facebook that she'd take them for walks in the woods and she'd have to carry Jack. And now we're getting the truth of it. The only time they went in the woods was when my grandchildren were here. And she says, and they're always kept an eye on by me. Well, she's established earlier that in terms of her grandchildren, she kept such a close eye on that she would call out to them asking, where are you? Which we know she's never said that she did this with Jack and Lily. So my takeaway from this, based on the statements that she's made and based on this statement, is that, first of all, her claims of watching Jack and Lily, that only occurred if she happened to look out the window and she saw that Jack had his boots off or his coat off, and then she could basically rub Malaya's nose in it, bring her up and rub her nose in it. You're a bad mum because your kid's outside and you haven't noticed that he's got these things off. But then after these things of, I'd take them for walks in the woods, it's now clear that walks in the wood for Janie occurred when her grandchildren were there, meaning Lily and Jack would have just tagged along. She probably was quite resentful of Jack basically plonking himself down on the ground and going, he's had enough. Because, of course, he was 2 years younger than the 2 middle children. Lily and Arrow were both 6. Jack was only 4, still on those little waddly baby legs, essentially. So when you listen to what she's saying, all these interactions that Janie is laying claim to, when you actually pay attention, these are interactions that involve her grandchildren as well. So she didn't spend any one-on-one time with Lily and Jack herself. It was just basically they were there when her grandchildren were around. Obviously, they got in the way. She couldn't get them to sod off, so she just tolerated them.
And I got a phone call saying that my grandchildren was missing. I wouldn't hesitate to drop whatever I was doing and hit the road and get here as fast as I could.
Okay, so she's talking about Cindy in this instance. And what is interesting here is that because she is focusing on Cindy, she's forgotten her claims of believing that Jack and Lily were like her own grandchildren. Now, she misses out the if here, but she's like, and I got a call saying that my grandchildren was missing. I wouldn't hesitate to drop what I was doing. So she's essentially saying here that as their grandmother, she would expect Cindy to just drop everything and hit the road when she found out that the children were missing. But you'll note, she makes it an if statement. Like, if I found out that my grandchildren were missing, this is what I would do. Not when I found out that Jack and Lily were missing, who I believe are like my grandchildren, I straight away went and put my boots on and went missing. She doesn't make the connection there at all. She's forgotten that she's claiming that they're like her grandchildren to her. So in her mind, she's thinking of Arrow and Rain, maybe Meadow, maybe Justin's kids, but she is not in that moment thinking of Jack and Lily in terms of her family. Hence the reason she's putting it back on Cindy like, well, if they were my grandchildren, I'd drop everything. It is just so telling. Even down to like, she didn't even say, even if in her head she's like, well, they're not really my grandchildren. You didn't even hear her say something like, well, I dropped everything, started searching straight away, even though they're not my biological grandchildren. But there's no differentiation there. In her mind, Lily and Jack have nothing to do with her in that moment. They're just these kids that have basically invaded her property. They're Cindy's grandchildren.
Does that tell you that Malaya was watching the kids? So don't come down on me because they weren't my grandchildren.
That pretty much sums it up, doesn't it? Don't come down on me because they weren't my grandchildren. You need to look directly at Malaya. You need to blame her for all of this. Because these children, they were just basically invading my property. They weren't welcome here. They weren't my responsibility. Don't look at me. These children had lived on her property for 2 years. By very specifically pointing out that A, they weren't her grandchildren, and B, they were Malaya's responsibility, she has basically shown exactly what she thought of Jack and Lily. They didn't belong there. They weren't her responsibility. She resented those times when she had to ring Malaya and tell her that Jack had his boots off. She resented their presence on the property. These were the children of her son's girlfriend. The girlfriend who is the mother of one of her grandchildren. But to her, that didn't make them family. From everything I hear, these children were living in a home where there was DV. Not just towards them, but towards Malaya. Basically, even if he wasn't hitting her, we don't have any proof of that. But we know that he was abusing her emotionally. We know that she had been isolated from her friends and family. We can be pretty certain, based on the number of times that Daniel and Janie basically badmouth Malaya as a parent, that what they were doing to Malaya in relation to that was probably 10 times worse. After 2 years living on that property, Malaya probably genuinely believed that she was a hopeless mother. She probably genuinely believed that she was a failure as a person. That would have been something that would have impacted Jack and Lily. They would have sensed her anxiety. They would have felt that there was distancing happening, because if she's saying that Daniel would step in when she was overwhelmed, what does that translate to? That is basically her saying that he got her to a point where she felt like she didn't know how to parent, and he would step in and go, this is how you discipline these children. In situations like this, you don't get that good cop, bad cop balance in how children are being raised. If Daniel said to Malaya, this is how these children need to be punished, she would not have felt confident to stand up and say, no, that's too much. This is what I think should happen. Because her parenting, her belief in herself as a parent had been so undermined by Daniel and Janie over the 2 years that she was living there, that she would not have felt that she had a right to suggest any alternative in terms of punishment or consequences for Lily and Jack when things went wrong. So essentially, Lily and Jack were living in a home where they didn't have an advocate. They didn't have someone on their side. They lived in a home where access to food in the kitchen was something that they weren't allowed to freely do. They lived in a home where there were locks on the doors. They lived in a home where they probably didn't know if today that particular behaviour is going to get them into trouble. So they're probably on eggshells the whole time, not knowing if what they were going to do was going to get them in trouble. It seems so very apparent from Daniel's statements, from Janie's statements, from observations of people who were on the sidelines essentially, that these children were essentially your Cinderella children. They were not in a happy home. They were not in a home with a stepfather who actually really gave a damn about them at all. This is the ultimate betrayal from a parent, as far as Malaya is concerned. She let these children down, not just by allowing them all to get into this situation, but by, in her selfishness, denying their real father, their biological father, access to them. We have so many beautiful photos, thanks to Belinda Gray, that show just how loved they were when they were with Belinda. And Malaya was so selfish that she denied them that, because she was quite happy to move in with this guy and accept his demands that basically she not take them to see their grandmother anymore. She was happy to accept him isolating her from her friends and most of her family. I understand the psychology of it, and that for someone like Malaya, by the time she realised what she was done, it was probably too late. But either way, she still betrayed her children. And there is a lesson in here for women who get themselves into these DV situations. And that is that it's never going to change. And if you have children in this situation, you could well be making a decision that is going to cost you your children. Anyway, this video has ended up being way longer than I expected. As you probably realised, it's taken me 2 days to get it together as opposed to 1. So this is where we finish. So on that note, thanks for listening. If you're new to my channel, please subscribe. Also, please hit that like button and please leave a comment below. Thank you, and I'll catch you in the next one.